Today, we're going to be discussing Trump's ceasefire plan that was recently signed between Israel and Hamas, a plan that resembles previous proposals, such as a plan adopted by the Arab League in March, and there was a similar plan that was proposed during the Biden administration in 2023, I believe. Now, the plan is deliberately vague. We'll get into all of the details of the plan and why I say that it's vague later on in the video. The most contentious issues are, of course, left out of the first phase, similar to the ceasefire proposal, an agreement that was signed in January of this year. So a chasm has been once again created between the first and the subsequent phases of the ceasefire agreement. Now, another thing that's interesting about this, and we're going to get into the proposal, it's a 20-point ceasefire proposal that was recently signed, but it's really not divided explicitly into phases as the previous proposals have been. So again, we'll get into more of that later. And without sustained pressure on all the parties and a commitment to address the thorny issues that come in those subsequent phases, including Hamas's disarmament, self-determination for the Palestinians, this kind of thing, this ceasefire is going to risk becoming merely another interlude before violence reignites. So we're going to start out with an article here that's just discussing Israel's approval of the deal that just happened, I believe, yesterday on the 10th. Either it was the 9th or the 10th. So this is from the Wall Street Journal. Israel's government has approved an agreement brokered by the Trump administration to free the remaining hostages held by Hamas and establish a ceasefire in Gaza. Sound familiar yet? The deal will bring the first significant pause in fighting since March, and the administration hopes it will be the first step towards a settlement that will involve talks over the disarmament of Hamas and the formation of an interim government to oversee Gaza. And so we're going to be getting into all of those details when we get into all the points of the plan. But I think that what's key about this part here is the idea that it's a first step towards a settlement that will involve talks over disarmament later on. We have to keep that in mind in the formation of an interim government. So we have to remember this is kind of the first step that Israel is signing off on. It's not necessarily the subsequent things that need to happen. It doesn't mean that I think that Trump isn't going to put any pressure on Israel to follow through with subsequent negotiations after the hostages are released and Hamas's prisoners are returned to the Gaza Strip. It just means that it's a far off process, and it's going to take a lot to get there to bring Israel to the table and start the subsequent negotiations and all the difficulties involved with that. With further withdrawals by the IDF, which we're going to get into, and then the disarmament portion. So U.S. troops began to arrive in Israel on Thursday, the first of about 200 being sent to support the ceasefire in Gaza as part of an international team. The U.S. troops are going to be, they're going to actually be headquartered outside of the Gaza Strip. The ceasefire went into effect with the vote of the Israeli government. U.S. CENTCOM will be leading an international stabilization force and set up a civil military coordination center that could include Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, and the United Arab Emirates. And the troops will help monitor the implementation of the ceasefire and transition to a civilian government, according to a U.S. official. They will help facilitate the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza. Again, all of this is very similar to the first phase of the agreement that was signed in January. Now, the interesting thing is, again, I know the U.S. troops are going to be headquartered out of the Gaza Strip. I don't know how true that is. Only time will tell. But that would be a break on any kind of restart of hostilities, right? I think both sides would probably think twice if U.S. troops are there. So we'll see. It's still early on. The deal was just signed, so we're going to have to pay close attention to when the hostages are released, how these different phases end up shaping out. Now, Trump said Thursday the hostages would be released on Monday or Tuesday. A critical task will be getting Israel and Hamas to agree on the exact lines for Israel's initial military withdrawal under the deal. So on October 10th, yesterday, Israeli forces made their first withdrawals, keeping them in control of 53% of the Gaza Strip. The White House plan includes 2 future withdrawals to around 40 and 15% of Gaza territory, and then the final stage will keep the IDF in control of the expanded buffer zone or security parameter around the Gaza Strip. This is, of course, one of many contentious issues that we'll be diving into. These withdrawals are probably not going to happen. So, article goes on, the bigger challenges will come as negotiators turn to the later phases of Trump's 20-point proposal to end the war, which includes securing Gaza and reconstruction. Israel and a range of Arab and Muslim countries expressed support when Trump unveiled his plan from the White House, reflecting international pressure to end a war that has threatened to destabilize the region. It already has, in my opinion. Regional powers, including Egypt, Turkey, and Qatar, have pressured Hamas to accept the U.S. plan. And as an aside, this plan was altered before the Arab countries and Muslim countries agreed to this plan behind closed doors. And then when Benjamin Netanyahu came to the White House for his visit last week, I think it was last Monday, there were some subsequent changes made to the plan. And I'm sure that has to do with maybe the security guarantees and the Israeli withdrawals. So that initial plan that the Arab countries actually agreed to is not necessarily this plan that we're about to go through isn't the same thing, basically. So it just kind of goes to show what ended up happening when the Israelis came and visited Trump. So we're going to go through the proposal, the 20-point proposal. It'll be brief. It's going to be more of a summary, but I've kind of have it broken up into the first 1 through 8 points are related to aid and the hostage releases and the prisoner exchanges. The second group is 9 through 12, and that'll be governance and reconstruction. The third group is security. So in the first point, Gaza will be a de-radicalized, terror-free zone that does not pose a threat to its neighbors. That would be Israel. And when we look at these words here, de-radicalized, terror-free zone, given the nature of Hamas, it's going to be very difficult to confirm or validate when the Gaza Strip is de-radicalized and terror-free. So this is kind of a pretext for the Israelis and the international force to remain there indefinitely. The second point, Gaza will be redeveloped for the benefit of the people of Gaza. Jared Kushner doesn't live in Gaza and all the realtors that are going to be swarming Gaza like hawks in the future, but that's who this reconstruction is really going to be benefiting. Very little of the wealth that's created in Gaza, if this plan is actually fully implemented and maintained, the people of Gaza aren't going to be benefited at all. They'll probably be safer. We'll concede that they'll likely be safer, maybe a little bit more prosperous, but it's not going to be benefiting. This reconstruction won't be benefiting them to the same extent as it will the people I just mentioned. Point 3, if both sides agree to the proposal, the war will immediately end. I would say the war is on pause right now, but we'll get into my thoughts a little bit later. Israeli forces will withdraw to the agreed upon line to prepare for a hostage release, which again, Monday, Tuesday, that's supposed to happen. During this time, all military operations, including aerial and artillery bombardment, will be suspended and battle lines will remain frozen until conditions are met for the complete staged withdrawal. We'll get into more on that later. Point 4, with 72 hours of Israel publicly accepting the agreement, all hostages will be released. Once all hostages are released, Israel will release 250 life sentence prisoners that they have, and then 1,700 Gazans. A little bit of an imbalance there, but that's typically how these exchanges go. Once all hostages are returned, Hamas members who commit to peaceful coexistence, I don't know what that means, and I don't know once more how that can be confirmed that they're going to commit to peaceful coexistence. I'm sure that the Israelis are going to have an issue or take issue with that, and it'll give them a reason not to comply with this deal. So Hamas members who commit to peaceful coexistence and to decommission their weapons will be given amnesty. And there's a lot of issues with that. Decommissioning their weapons. What weapons are they going to decommission? Are all of them going to be required to decommission their weapons? How will they confirm that they've all decommissioned their weapons and turned their weapons over to this multinational force that we're about to get into? All these questions remain. Members of Hamas who wish to leave Gaza will be provided safe passage to receiving countries. That'll likely be Qatar. So if they can make it out of the country, they're probably all going to go to Qatar or Egypt. I say if because I'm sure the IDF and Mossad will be ensuring that many of them will not make it out of the country if we get to this part of the deal. Point 7, upon acceptance of this agreement, full aid will be immediately sent into the Gaza Strip. At a minimum, aid quantities will be consistent with what was included in the January 19th, 2025 agreement, more on that in a moment, regarding humanitarian aid, including rehabilitation of infrastructure, rehabilitation of hospitals and bakeries, and entry of necessary equipment to remove rubble and open roads, and potentially build Israeli houses in some areas, just saying. And just as an aside to this point 7, the agreement's humanitarian provisions do mirror those from January, the failed ceasefire process in January that promised 1,600 or 600 aid trucks would enter Gaza daily. That commitment went unfulfilled then, and it'll face similar obstacles now. The UN and its partners simply lack the capacity to reliably send 600 trucks per day, and it might not be 600 trucks. I don't know if they've given a number yet of how many aid trucks will be entering, but that was the old agreement. But the UN didn't have the capacity to reliably send in the trucks, and there are bureaucratic bottlenecks at the UN, and they were at the UN and also imposed by Israel at Gaza's border crossings, and that complicated delivery. And right now, perhaps it's more likely that the UN will be able to get aid some aid in, but then you also have these the organization. What's it called? I forgot the organization that's been working in Israel to distribute aid, the GHF. Now, the GHF situation and all of the mercenaries involved with that and the IDF securing those sites hasn't been that successful, but it's seen some success, but it's also been like a killing ground for people who are trying to get the aid. So hopefully that can be straightened out if international forces come in, and those sites can be more secure in conjunction with the UN trucks, get everyone fed and get the water and electricity and everything back on. So that was just an aside. So complications will likely recur when it comes to getting aid into the Strip. It'll probably start out really well, but we'll see. Point 8, entry of distribution and aid in the Gaza Strip will proceed without interference from the two parties. So that interference from the Israelis or Hamas through the UN and its agencies and the Red Crescent, in addition to other international institutions not associated in any manner with either party. So again, probably GHF will be involved with that as well. So this next section concerns mostly governance and reconstruction. So in point 9, we have Gaza will be governed under the temporary transitional governance of a technocratic, and we'll get back to that word in a moment, apolitical Palestinian committee, responsible for delivering the day-to-day running of public services and municipalities for the people of Gaza. The committee will be made up of qualified Palestinians and international experts, with oversight and supervision by a new international body, the Board of Peace. So, a couple of notes here. The agreement envisions a technocratic Palestinian government. Now, that governance participants haven't been identified or granted legitimacy. We don't know what the size of this agency, this this government's going to be. We don't have any of the details fleshed out on that. And that could be time consuming. It will be time consuming to find qualified, recognizable, acceptable people to the Board of Peace that's overseeing this government, and also to the people in the Gaza Strip. So the plan establishes no way to achieve the Palestinians' consent for who will govern them. Problematic because this sort of ambiguous way that they've been governed is, in a way, what gave birth to Hamas being elected in the first place, right? And we've covered that in another video. So this creates an untenable situation in which Gaza's intended governing authority would have no mandate from the population it is meant to serve. And there's problems with getting a mandate right now because it is a war zone. You have reconstruction that's going to need to take place and all these other things. So it would only make sense to a certain extent to impose this kind of governance on them, because they wouldn't really be able to work through any kind of democratic process and get themselves expressed when the country is basically in shambles. I don't think that they're going to get to this point to where they actually can, elect a government. But that's just an aside on this sort of technocratic Palestinian government that's going to be imposed on the people. Who's going to, and then on regard to Trump's Board of Peace that he's going to be heading, this is the second part of point 9. So the technocratic government will be headed and chaired by Trump. This body will set the framework and handle the funding for the redevelopment of Gaza until such time as the Palestinian Authority has completed its reform program. Now, the body will set the framework and handle the functioning of for the redevelopment of Gaza. And you would think that this technocratic government that they're creating would have a voice in that reconstruction. So it seems like this body that Trump is going to be overseeing, we don't know who all is going to be made, what the board of this Board of Peace is going to be made up of, who's going to fill its the hundreds of positions necessary for it to function, what international organizations are going to empower it and fund it, and all these different things. You're going to have this organization overseeing the government. And I was just wondering, I wonder if the technocratic Palestinian government is going to have anything to do with this redevelopment that Trump's Board of Peace is going to be handling. So we'll move on to point 10. Point 10, a Trump economic development plan. Obviously, this will likely be what's going to be implemented by the Board of Peace that he's going to be overseeing. So it's going to be a Trump economic development plan to rebuild and energize Gaza. It will be created by convening a panel of experts who have helped birth some of the thriving modern miracle cities in the Middle East. Now, we know who those experts are likely going to be. Big investors from the Middle East, from the U.S., Jared Kushner's people. So that's who they're going to use to rebuild and energize and develop a plan for the Gaza Strip. Sounding like one of the first videos that we did, right? I forgot what the term was they used. Anyways, they're going to turn it into a resort, basically. Now, a special economic zone, point 11, will be established with preferred tariff and access rates to be negotiated with participating countries. Now, I don't know what that means. Is that kind of what I was discussing earlier? Is that going to be sort of a closed off area of the Gaza Strip that your average poor Palestinian can't enter, and it's going to be reserved for tourists and stuff like that? Very likely that's what this means. Unfortunate, but like I said, this isn't something to benefit the Palestinian people. I mean, at the end of the day, it's more about keeping it. I would say that at the minimum, they're just going to they'll be at least fed. They'll probably be working in hospitality, and they might be a little, there might be a modicum of safety involved for them, more so than now, obviously. But, what Trump is trying to do should really lift up all the people there, not just, a chosen cadre of investors. But that's my position there. Point 12, we're almost through these. No one will be forced to leave Gaza. and those who wish to leave will be free to do so and free to return. We will encourage people to stay and offer them the opportunity to build a better Gaza. In other words, service the wealthy tourists at the beaches and stuff. Now, the last set we have here regards security. Point 13, Hamas and other factions agree to not have any role in the governance of Gaza directly, indirectly, or in any form. Again, this is kind of a reoccurring point with some of these positions in this paper. I don't know how they're going to be able to vet these people. I guess that's where Palantir comes in, Peter Thiel's surveillance network. I guess maybe they've got surveillance of all the people who are participating with Hamas and terrorism and in this war. So they're going to be able to confirm, I guess. Otherwise, I don't know how they would be able to vet them. I mean, I would think that whoever's left in Hamas could basically, toss their uniform off and join the crowds of people going back to the city and just melt into the masses. But I'm not sure how they're going to confirm whether or not they are Hamas or not. But that's going to be another sticking point. And that's one that's going to be drawn out for quite some time, confirming whether or not all the weapons have been handed over and confirming whether or not these people who are entering the governance of Gaza or in any position of authority, whether it's security or governance, making sure that they were never part of Hamas. Be very difficult. Point 14, a guarantee will be provided by regional partners to ensure that Hamas and the factions comply with their obligations and that New Gaza poses no threat to its neighbors or its people. Point 15, the United States will work with Arab and international partners to develop a temporary international stabilization force to immediately deploy to Gaza. The ISF will train and provide support to vetted Palestinian police forces. There's that thing again. I'm going to keep bringing it up. Vetted. I don't know how they're going to vet them. Forces in Gaza, and will consult with Jordan and Egypt, who have extensive experience in this field. This force will be a long-term international security solution. The ISF will work with Israel and Egypt to help secure border areas along with newly trained Palestinian police forces. Now, the Arab and international forces that are going to be training these security forces in the Gaza Strip, these Palestinian security forces, I'm going to be very interested to see again where specifically they're coming from, right? Because if they're coming from Europe or if they're coming from one of these Arab countries that maybe don't share the same values as the Palestinians or the same sect of Islam or something like that, be a huge communication barrier, right? People who aren't familiar, people who may be training them that aren't familiar with the area, the culture, and all of these different things, that could be a recipe for disaster. Where you can have them trained at the minimum, but they won't be the most effective when they're needed, right? So it's vetting, of course, making sure that they weren't part of Hamas or whatever, but then it's also, are the people training them familiar with the culture and the norms and all of the other things necessary for cohesive training to take place? And just as another note here, U.S. military officials have opined privately that it could easily take 18 months to build a properly vetted, effective Palestinian security force, and rolling out the next phase of the peace plan can't wait that long. But it would have to. It's like you can't ram half of the things that we're going through into what's going on over there right now, right? I know that's the wish and that's the thought process for many people who are looking at this, thinking that it's kind of going to be an overnight process. It's going to take years. And the security forces are going to be the most important component of all of this. Whoever it is that's doing the training and who's, what this security force looks like and this kind of thing. Point 16, and this is what I thought was the most important one, so we'll spend some time on point 16. Israel will not occupy or annex Gaza. As the ISF establishes control and stability, the IDF will withdraw based on standards, milestones, and timeframes linked to demilitarization that will be agreed upon between the IDF, ISF, the guarantors, and the United States, with the objective of a secure Gaza that no longer poses a threat to Israel, Egypt, or its citizens. That's the first part of it. So the withdrawal is contingent on standards, milestones, and timeframes linked to demilitarization that will be agreed upon between the IDF, ISF, guarantors, and the United States. Those standards, milestones, and timeframes, those are all negotiation processes that could take years. And when I first read this, that's the first thing I thought. So their withdrawals, which is one of the key requirements that Hamas has always been talking about when it comes to these negotiations. It was always about stopping the war and the IDF leaving. So this key point here regarding withdrawals is so ambiguous because it's all contingent on whether or not these standards, milestones, and timeframes are negotiated properly and an understanding is reached. It's about the time frame, right? How long is it going to take to establish the standards, set the standards for both sides for negotiations, and then work out the details, and then implement the details, and then the IDF leaves? That's a years-long process. That's not something that happens overnight. So again, this is like a poison pill, easily, right? The standards, milestones, and timeframes linked to demilitarization. What are those standards? What are those standards and milestones, right? How does both sides understand those standards and milestones, first of all? And then once that understanding is established, then you have to actually get into the negotiations and discuss the details. That's going to take some time. And then there needs to be an implementation, as I just said. So that was a hang up for me. Now, the second part here, practically the IDF will progressively hand over the Gaza territory it occupies to the ISF, according to an agreement they will make with the transitional authority until they are withdrawn completely from Gaza, save for the security parameter presence that's around the Gaza Strip that we've talked about. So a couple of notes here. The IDF's full withdrawal from Gaza is supposed to proceed in tandem with Hamas's disarmament, right? That's kind of what we were just going over. You have to figure out what the standard is, what those milestones are, negotiate them, implement them. You have to check back on them. You have to confirm them, verify them. There has to be some kind of testing mechanism to see if they're complying, and then they leave. So the IDF's full withdrawal from Gaza is supposed to proceed in tandem with Hamas's disarmament. Now, Emet Siegel, an Israeli journalist close to Israeli Prime Minister Bibi, has reported that the IDF has no intention of relinquishing power over the 53% of Gaza it currently occupies. Israel's behavior always supports this assumption. This is an example. The IDF maintains 5 positions on Lebanese hilltops despite signing a November 2024 ceasefire deal with Hezbollah, the Lebanese militant group that required Israeli forces to withdraw. Israel has kept troops in Syria despite U.S. efforts to broker Israeli-Syrian security arrangements. And this is the issue. A lot of people will say, well, of course they stay in these areas. They're trying to defend themselves. Well, the problem is that, as we're seeing, the U.S. and several partners in the Middle East are trying to broker agreements between Israel and these different groups that are initiating hostilities against Israel, or Israel initiating hostilities against them. These groups that Israel, in other words, has been at war with. Plenty of partners are willing to negotiate, and it's there, but Israel will not comply with that because it's really about them just taking, expanding and taking more land. Ultimately, it's not about brokering settlements between these warring parties. So another point I have here is, in reality, Washington's Arab and regional partners may be much less inclined than some observers assume to want to risk their soldiers' lives or jeopardize their own domestic legitimacy by taking on the mission of basically training a new security force in the Gaza Strip and trying to maintain security. So the plan will likely create a situation in which 4 distinct military forces are present in Gaza. Remember, the U.S. troops are allegedly outside of Gaza. You have mercenaries in there, but the U.S. troops will be based outside of Gaza, managing the troops that are inside Gaza, and it's likely going to be Hamas fighters that haven't disarmed, Palestinian troops that are being trained, international peacekeepers, other countries, and the IDF. This quartet does not even include other armed clans and factions, such as the PIG or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And no other country will be eager to deploy its troops into such a volatile environment, especially with how unclear a lot of this is. Because it's a lot of stuff. I know that when you listen to this, it's a lot of stuff, right? There's a lot of stuff that's loaded into this. It's a 20-point agreement, but there's a lot in there. It's almost like you have to really comb through it. But and I'm going to finish this off, and then we'll call it a day. But really, what it boils down to is the hostage releases right now. That's a huge deal, and it's a huge benefit for Netanyahu, and that's like one of the biggest hindrances that he's had. He's ignored it, but after that happens, and there's a short reprieve, it's very likely that before any of these different elements are introduced into the Gaza Strip, and any of this stuff is mapped out any further, that hostilities could resume, because it's just a lot, right? And I'm going to get into some of my thoughts on it in a minute, but this administration, Trump, does not have the energy to manage as closely as he would need to this project. I mean, this is a years-long project, and if he just developed himself, if this was like his sole foreign policy issue, then maybe it would look successful, and if he was aggressively pursuing both sides to fulfill their obligations. But he's not going to do that, right? Because he's thinking about invading Venezuela. He's wanting to he wanting to use all of these derogatory ways to talk about the Russians. Now he's antagonizing the Russians, wanting to send them Tomahawk cruise missiles and all of these things. So he's creating a lot of tension where there doesn't need to be around the world. So how is he going to manage this project as closely as he would need to? Well, he's going to let Israel manage it. And I think that we can understand what that's going to look like. So point 17, in the event Hamas delays or rejects this proposal, including the scaled up aid operation, the above, will proceed in the terror-free areas handed over from the IDF to the ISF. An interfaith dialogue process, point 18, will be established based on the values of tolerance and peaceful coexistence to try to change mindsets and narratives of Palestinians and Israelis by emphasizing the benefits that can be derived from peace. Awesome. I don't have any comment there. While Gaza redevelopment advances, and when the Palestinian Authority reform program is faithfully carried out, the conditions may finally be in place for a credible pathway for Palestinian self-determination and statehood. Now, this is all just fluff, which we recognize as the aspiration of the Palestinian people. Palestinian reform program, it's just ridiculous. And I don't know much about it, but it's basically they're wanting, the Israelis are wanting the Palestinians to move away from their, I guess, radical Islamic, whatever beliefs about Jews, right? They want them to start teaching them things differently in school that are pro-Israel, all of these different nonsensical things. So that's never going to happen, and they know that. Again, a lot of these are just poison pills. And then finally, point 20, the United States will establish a dialogue between Israel and the Palestinians to agree on a political horizon for peaceful and prosperous coexistence. Another something, again, once more, that's not going to happen. So just to, round everything off, this is the peace proposal that was just signed. The hostages should be released. Prisoners should be exchanged on Monday or Tuesday. So we shall see. It's a paper-thin proposal agreement that was signed. It's likely built basically to fail. But it's also there for a political purpose, particularly for Trump, of course, and Netanyahu. Election season's coming up for Netanyahu. Getting the hostages back is going to be a huge benefit for him. For Trump, he wants a Nobel. He's obsessed about it. I've been hearing about it for the past week. It's tiresome and really annoying. But he wants a Nobel for ending a war or something like that. He said he's ended like 7 wars, which is just not true. But he wants a Nobel for this. And this is one of the things that makes me kind of worried about how he chooses to approach Russia, because this is the kind of nonsense that he wanted to impose on the Ukrainians and the Russians. a paper-thin agreement that could easily be reneged on at any given time once Ukraine, for example, rearms and more weapons are pumped into Ukraine. So this is exactly what he was doing. He wanted a hollow agreement just like this to impose on Putin. And Putin said, get out of here. We're not doing it. And that's that. And then he wanted to take credit for it, right? Procrastinate, because this could have stopped a long time ago, right? This could have stopped before he got into office. If you would have told the Israelis, get back into the deal, you're going back into the second phase in March when they got out of the first agreement. This could have stopped a long time ago. So no, I don't think that there's much credit that I can give Trump for this. But when we look at the dynamics here, and we look back again at that first agreement, it could have been stopped then. And, if he has the energy and the will, then he could have done the same thing. He could have stopped what was going on between Russia and Ukraine, right? But it's like you have to take a clear position. But a couple of thoughts from me, a clear and consistent position. As to why now, shortage of fighters is a good starting point. I think on both sides, on the side of Hamas and the IDF, routine call-ups in Israel, and of course those call-up of reservists in Israel was starting to become a problem because there's this big debate going on in Israel right now about whether or not ultra-Orthodox men need to be conscripted as well, and they were coming pretty close to drafting the ultra-Orthodox men into the IDF. And of course, Hamas's fighters, we know that they're depleted, right? I mean, there's a lot of bombing that I see when I follow some of this stuff, but I don't think I've ever really seen much over the past couple of months, like, Hamas militants in the streets fighting the Israelis or in tanks or whatever, popping out of the ground. So shortage of fighters on both sides. That's one reason. International pressure, particularly from Qatar, is another reason. He's given Qatar a security guaranteed, and that plays an important role. He was pissed off the other day when Israel decided that they were going to attack Qatar, trying to kill one of the lead negotiators for Hamas. And they attacked Qatar on Qatari soil, and that's a close partner of the U.S. And so Trump was very upset with that. And that basically enhanced Trump's security guarantee to Qatar. And by promising Qatar protection, the United States enables the country to serve as a refuge for Hamas members if they decide to leave the Gaza Strip, who might otherwise be on Israel's target list if they stayed in the Gaza Strip. And then a few implications. And again, like I said earlier, it's election season in Israel. There could be a violation after hostages are released of this agreement, right? Or there could be, once again, a stop to all negotiations after the hostages are released. We don't know. But because election season is around, Netanyahu's popularity will probably be boosted because the hostages come home, but also starting back hostilities might also boost his popularity more if some kind of incursion happens during this phase of the ceasefire. They would be likely the ones to violate it, since that's been historically what's happened since this war has started. And also, I think that these are going to be, as I said earlier, slow, deliberate, and cumbersome negotiations, and neither side is going to make concessions, right? When we were talking earlier about negotiations that would pertain to the withdrawal of the IDF, those negotiations are going to be long and drawn out. They're going to be cumbersome. They're going to be both sides are going to be deliberately myopic, and it's just going to drag on, and eventually probably going to see a resumption of hostilities. And what does all this mean? It means that the United States has to constantly coordinate with its partners and press all parties, the Israelis and the Palestinians, the Hamas, whatever, to honor the deal, to move forward with the deal after the hostages are released, right? And to move to more ambitious steps involving the reconstruction and the security of the Gaza Strip, right? Constantly coordinating, constantly managing. That's what we were just saying earlier. That's what the administration has to do to see this deal through. right? And I'm not confident that that's going to happen, right? Because, and I think that the cynical way that I look at this administration is going to be probably validated in the next coming months once this deal falls apart, right? It's a blessing that the hostages get out. It's a blessing that the Palestinians get to eat again. Hopefully, infrastructure is repaired to a certain extent, but I don't think that Trump is interested in keeping a sustained process going when it comes to rebuilding uh, and securing the Gaza Strip now, right? I do believe that a lot of this is theater, and it's PR. It's good PR for him. He wants the Nobel. He wants to be able to say, "I ended this war," and this kind of thing. I think that's probably as far as it goes. He is mercurial and uninterested in the root causes of this situation, just like he is in the Russia-Ukraine situation, right? And so his positions might change. He might focus on a different problem or otherwise pass it on completely to Israel. Okay. But this is why I think it's going to fall apart. Because again, the kind of energy, the kind of maintenance, the kind of interest that you have to invest into this kind of project, this is a decades-long feud. And the thing that you need, the kind of dedication that the administration needs to this one project over the next couple of years in order to see this stuff through, I don't see that kind of ambition in this administration. I don't see them wanting to take that kind of interest. I think Trump wanted to wash his hands of it, get himself a PR victory, maybe next year get a Nobel, and that's it. So one good thing is that if other countries, and this is my last point, do make it to the Gaza Strip and monitor this process, that could be a potential check on further Israeli aggression or aggression from Hamas. So that could be a situation that sort of is a security guarantee in itself if the two sides don't start fighting again. So anyways, that is it for me. I have not been posting too much lately because there's a lot of redundant things in the news in terms of foreign policy, which is typically what we discuss on this channel. But we'll be doing some more content probably soon. But thank you for joining me.